Hello everybody, it's Tommy and welcome back to another speed build for the Disney save. Today we are going to be working on a residential house for Mama Odie from Princess and the Frog. This is based after the movie. She lives in this house that is a boat stuck in a tree. So we're essentially going to be building a tiny little boat in a tree. It's kind of a tree house, it's kind of not. It's definitely one of the weirder things that I've built, and why not put it right next to the Dumbo Circus, because that's just how we roll here. But basically this lot formerly was Maurice's cottage, or Belle's cottage, from the Little Beauty and the Beast area in this section of Willow Creek, and I've been slowly replacing it so that we could move those builds to Henford-on-Bagley and replace all of the ones in this area, as well as Gaston's that's going to be getting replaced as well. Actually, in my last video, I mentioned that there was only going to be 1 or 2 more builds after that to fill out this area, and there's 3 more total. So we have this one today, we have the one that is off to the left that you can kind of see a little bit. Sorry about the seagulls that literally never end here. You can kind of see it off to the left there a little bit. And we are going to be replacing Gaston's as well. So that is 3 lots total. And today's is a residential. So if you remember, I did make Mama Odie a while ago. She was one of our first townies for Willow Creek, so she's already existent in the save, but she is a townie, and she's finally going to be given her proper home. This was actually something that was really highly requested by patrons the first time we were trying to make plans for Willow Creek, and I didn't really want to tackle this build because it's just a little bit... I felt like I was maybe not going to be able to execute this very well. So the biggest reason being because of how the boat was placed in the tree from the movie. In the movie, it's sort of like tilted and at an angle, and there's really no way in The Sims to replicate anything close to that. So I was just immediately kind of thrown off by the idea. And I think I've seen people try to do this build before where they actually use like prop replicas from Get Famous and kind of like use some of those ship pieces that you can get for the sets to do this build, but I really wanted this to be super livable and be able to hang lots of stuff on the walls and have it be really colorful and reminiscent of the movie as well. So I knew I wanted to actually build a structure, and I have built boats before. They are definitely nothing new to me. We actually have one in the Disney save called the Devil's Bayou that is like a steamboat paddle boat of sorts, and that one was a ton of fun to build. So after a little bit of convincing and honestly just trying to keep some of this area a bit residential, because the thing that I think I was most worried about when moving the Belle's Village group of builds out of this area is that we were going to be taking away too many residentials for Willow Creek. It was a really good balance before, and I didn't want to take away from it too much, so I knew that for the most part I wanted this area to remain largely residential as it is in the original version of it. And it just seemed natural that if any of the townies were going to be getting a house, it would probably be the one that basically just didn't make it into the first version by a slim margin. So Mama Odie it is. Also, I think the Enchantress and her, who does still live across the street and will be staying there, she owns Chapter 3 bookstore, so it kind of makes sense to keep her in this area, even though she is still a part of Beauty and the Beast, and she'll kind of be the only character that lives here. I felt like it was okay to keep her here. Her house fits so much better into this area than it's going to in Henford-on-Bagley, and she's probably the one build and the one residential that I would have felt comfortable keeping here because it's a little bit outside of the idea of what everything else was over here. But the Enchantress is like this lonesome spellcaster, and her house is entirely underground. She doesn't really keep a lot of friends. She has like Belle that will be a friend down the line, but currently in my version of the save right now, Belle is not an existent character, so she doesn't have a ton of friends. She has her cats, she keeps to herself. I think she ended up becoming slight friends with some of the other Beauty and the Beast characters because of the fact that she has to, essentially. Like, one of the things that I've been implementing recently is making movie clubs. So essentially all of the characters that are from one movie will end up in a club together so that you could start a club gathering and kind of call all of the like characters to one area if you needed to. And when you do that, it actually adds a little bit of friendship value to everybody that is in the club. So she does have some friendships with some characters, but largely she really doesn't, and I just thought that Mama Odie might make a good neighbor for her. I, as a rule of thumb, do not implement cross-movie friendships meaning that I usually only try to keep Sims friends if they are from a movie or they live in the same household together. So really the only exception to that is Forgotten Hollow, because we have a couple of households. Actually, it's only really one household. No, there's two. Maleficent's household and the Underworld household that has Chernobog, Horn King, Hades, Pain and Panic. A lot of those characters have friendships and relationships because it makes a lot of sense. The world's a lot smaller, and characters living in the same household but like not having a relationship is not really, it doesn't make the most sense to me. So I do implement some of that stuff, but for the most part, all of the Princess and the Frog characters, for example, with Mama Odie here, kind of only really know each other, but obviously it's optional, right? So anybody who plays the save, they're able to kind of decide what they want the save file to be. Do you want it to be something where all Disney characters kind of coexist simultaneously and they can all interact? Or are you trying to play out certain storylines, so you really don't want those friendships to be there? So I kind of don't implement them off the bat so that you don't have Elsa calling Tiana over to her house to like hang out or something, just in case those people, you know, that didn't already want those relationships there and established they're not already there. And I think that's a really great rule of thumb. But if you wanted to, Mama Odie is pretty similar to the Enchantress. She does live very she's by her lonesome. I imagine she knows everybody and everybody kind of knows her, but she doesn't keep too many friends. And she does actually have, like, I know her townie version had some friendships with like Naveen and Tiana and Ray. They are very clearly like know one another from the movie, so I did put in some of that kind of stuff. This was actually the first build that I was able to use the new pond tool, and I'm so excited about this pond tool. I really thought that this was going to be a little rough, if I'm honest. I thought it was going to be game-breaking. I thought it was going to be kind of like terrain. I avoid using terrain in pretty much every circumstance that I can get away with it, because it doesn't work as well as I would want it to. And I think when I think about it, I often compare it to Planet Zoo, because they have such a great terrain system for the game mechanic, and I just love it, and I think it works so well. So when we got the introduction of ponds, I immediately was like, not another terrain tool. This is going to be rough. And it still does use the terrain itself, the terrain tools. So you have to be somewhat familiar with it, or I guess comfortable with it, to be able to use the ponds, because you essentially have to dig holes in the ground with the terrain tools and then sort of fill them up with like these water buckets, and it puts lines on the ground where you can kind of click so that you can just fill them up. But it looks really clean, and I like it a lot better than trying to do pools. I like it a lot better than Sims trying to constantly get in water that I don't want them in. But by far, the best feature so far is definitely these little animated animals that you can add into the water. So I've added mosquitoes, fireflies, alligators, turtles, and I think fish to this lot. All of them make sense. I think there's also a couple of dragonflies flying around. It looks beautiful in live mode. I love it so much. The only like major complaint that I have about it, and this is like really major, they need to do something about this, or please, for the love of God, somebody do a mod, is the fact that in build and buy, when you're in build mode, those little stickers that you put on the ground to kind of show off where the animations are going to go. So if you're going to add fireflies, they come in these little like stickers almost that you place all over the water. And it's there to tell the game, this is where I want you to animate the firefly. However, they look like that in build mode. They stay as stickers. And even worse than that, I think, when you go to the map head overview and you are looking at all of the lots in your world, if you have a bunch of them on the ground, they're going to show up in the map overview, and that is a travesty for me personally. I am so picky about how my map overviews look, and to look on one of my beautiful lots like this and just see like chunks of white sticking out of the pond all over the overview, I hate it so much in ways that I cannot explain. I think they absolutely need to fix it. Also, this is just a little bit of like a content creator thing, but I use a mod called, I think it's Free Build Cam, And I believe it's also by Twisted Mexi, who makes Tool and makes a lot of like really, really great mods for The Sims. It's essentially a free cam mode for build mode. So you don't have to go over to live mode to take photos, which saves me a ton of time. It helps me get great lighting. But the problem with that now is that if I use these little animation stickers, it doesn't take those away. So they're kind of like in my thumbnail and it's really ugly. So I had to go to live mode to get pictures of this build today. Not ideal. Takes me way too much time to get the proper lighting, the proper weather, all that good stuff. So I kind of hate that feature, absolutely. And I hope that somebody makes a mod, because honestly, I don't really see them patching that out. But nonetheless, it works out pretty well. We have stuck some additional trees into the slot that are like these bayou type of trees and bits that are from the Willow Creek like debug expansion. And you can kind of see them in the background of Willow Creek, so I love to be able to use them in builds like this so we can drag them into the lots a little bit and have them be kind of, it looks nice with the world. Like you can look out onto Willow Creek and all the trees sort of match. We're using a lot of the similar foliage. And then one thing that I also did is just like put a lot of growth down bottom. I really wanted this lot to be very, very hidden so that from the outside, it's not as immediately obvious what you're looking at. It could just be like a giant tree with like a little pond underneath and something that's a little bit more natural to the area. And then obviously we know that it is a residential, kind of how we did the Enchantress's home again, where I really wanted the lot to feel very hidden and cut off from the rest of the world. So I completely surrounded that house by trees so that we could really hide it in there. And that worked a lot better because it was sort of like on the ground level, whereas here the house is kind of floating in the air, so it was a lot harder to hide, but I did the best that I could, I feel. And then the rest of the house was really just about trying to replicate what we saw from the movie and clutter the absolute heck out of this without making it unlivable. So the movie has Mama Odie, this house that she lives in is like cracked walls, overgrowth everywhere, literal holes in the floor, and she has so much like magic, voodoo, jars, things from the ocean everywhere, like raw food on the floor, literal trash in some scenes, but a lot of it was like sunken ship type of things, anchors, deep sea diving, nets that are seemingly like lobstering nets, ocean nets, and then lots of stuff that is for her spellcasting. So like jars with miscellaneous things in them, lots of plants, lots of things that she could probably use in potion construction. So I wanted to, with this very limited space that we're already kind of working on here, fill this place to the brim with all sorts of clutter and still be able to have your Sims walk around. Also important to note, in the movie, she's brewing like this potion, and she's brewing it in the bathtub, which I think would be so fun to add to The Sims as like a spellcaster feature, that essentially like anything that has the ability to have water added to it in any capacity could also be used for potions. She has this like white clawfoot bathtub in the middle of her house that she's like brewing a potion in. So I did go ahead and use that in the bathroom. The bathroom is actually the front portion of the build that's sort of dark in a lot of these shots. It's not going to be a part of today's video because it is rather long watching me walk around or go around, kind of clutter this place up a bit. But of course you'll get some screenshots of it at the very end if you stay tuned. Also, another big thing for this build was candles and the hanging glass bottle lights. So in the past, this was like a very early build for the Disney save. So if you haven't seen it, I built a park called the Froggy Bayou, and it's a park slash wedding venue, and in the background there are all these willow trees with these glass bottle lights hanging from them. And that was actually inspired by Mama Odie, because at the time when I was planning that version of Willow Creek, obviously I knew Mama Odie was not going to be getting a residential, but I thought it was a really beautiful thing that gets shown in the movie many, many times. And even when I announced this build was going to be coming to the save file, immediately everybody was like, can't wait to see the stained glass lighting, the bottle lighting. It's such a staple for the decor of this area, and also specifically Mama Odie. It's just absolutely beautiful. So I really wanted to go heavy-handed with it and overdo it. And I love to use these lights from Tiny Living. I gotta be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the Tiny Living stuff pack. I think it was kind of a letdown, but these lights are beautiful, and they come in so many amazing colors, and they are probably one of the closest lights in the game that I think personally resembles bottles other than the mason jars. And the only reason the mason jars really don't work here is because they don't come in as many colors. So I've gone ahead and used them in this build instead with the beautiful tiny living lights. Not only did I do it very heavy-handed in the rooms, but I also wanted it to be all over the outside of the ship, and then additionally hanging from the big tree that's over the top of this place that makes it look the most like a tree house. There's tons of lighting that's hanging from that as well, and I basically exclusively use these tiny living lights, a little bit of the mason jar lighting if it kind of fits in designated areas. But in the movie she has this like almost throne wicker chair, and you can see that there are just tons of these lights over to the right of it, so I wanted to kind of recreate that area. I was really worried about overcluttering this place, I have to be honest. I just wanted it to be livable, because there's nothing worse than spending so much time adding tons of clutter and tons of shelves and just stuff everywhere, only to have to slowly go through and find out what's making it so that your Sims can't walk around and like delete things and take away from the total vibe that we were going for. So I'm trying to make everything hug the walls and stick kind of close to edges, and I'm also in live mode for part of the video because I have one of my dedicated playtest Sims here on the lot to kind of check and make sure that things are still going well. And for the most part, I have managed to make everything work, so pretty excited about that because it is just mighty cluttered in here, and I wasn't sure for a minute what we were going to do, especially with some of these plants and stuff that are kind of hanging from the wall and the overgrowth. And in the movie, she has, specifically in the kitchen, which is also kind of the bathroom, because I mentioned earlier the bathtub that she's brewing the potion in, there are so many like plants hanging from the walls, and a lot of those like spices and little herbal type of hanging plants that we have. We have one from the Star Wars pack. I think we have one from Seasons and also one from Realm of Magic at this point. Those are some of my favorite items to get. I actually don't mind when the Sims team remakes that item 100 times like they do with other items. That's actually one that I'm like kind of a fan of because it always comes out just different enough that it really helps for builds like these to just get that vibe of like so many internal plants hanging in different ways, and like terrariums hanging from the ceiling, and some of those, I think it's Nifty Knitting hanging plants as well, kind of dangling throughout. And I think we also got one more recently in the Dream Home pack or Paranormal Stuff, one of the two. So I really wanted to overdo it. It would be nice if we had more that would just like simply hung from the ceiling, almost like chandeliers that you could place in the middle of rooms and just had like vines kind of hanging down into the room, because that's really, really the vibe for this place. But I think with a combination of some of the like Christmassy stuff that we got in one of the expansion packs, I managed to kind of make it work in here. So the bottom floor is the main living area. It obviously contains the kitchen and a small dining area, and then a little bit of seating, really focusing on that main chair that is shown in the movie. And obviously she's a very solitary character, so she's not going to have a ton of company over unless you're doing storytelling and things like that. But I wasn't too worried about like space in here. I was just more worried about making it like personalized to her character. And then if you go up the ladder in the middle of the living room there, you get to her bedroom, which is sort of at the front of the ship. And I've gone ahead and used a platform to make this area even smaller and kind of like clutter all of the bits up next to her bed. She is seen in the movie practicing like forms of potions and like references to voodoo and things like that. She's a little bit of a different spellcaster than some of the other ones that we have in the save file. Definitely very powerful, kind of all-knowing, and it'll be interesting to go back to her character when I do like check her out before we put out the new version of the save file, and just make sure I have all of her spellcaster stats set really appropriate to how she's depicted in the film, because I do try to think about things like that whenever I do spellcasters, like what type of magic would they actually be using? Are they more potion leaning? And then specifically for the Sims, they have these like different variations of magic. There's I think one's called practical and one is called something else, and some of them lean a little bit more evil or good. So I try to unlock things and like match up the knowledge of their spellcasting with whatever they're depicted from their movie as being very skilled in. So I'm going to go back and check her character and just make sure that everything is like all squared away and ready to go for that. She does have a snake that she lives with. It's an animal that we don't have in The Sims, obviously, so I think I've represented it in the form of a familiar, and that being like one of those like floating familiars from the orbs. If I'm not mistaken, I think I gave her the frog one. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know that we really don't have one that's like a snake. Obviously, if we ever got an update, you know, it's one of those things that I would come back and add into the game, but I don't necessarily see them adding something like that. In fact, I don't really see them adding in more caged animals of any kind. Even when we got rabbits in this most recent cottage living pack, they are more free range rabbits, and they are like friends that you can make, and you can't even really keep them on your lot, which I kind of understand why they're going that direction with it. So I can almost see them probably never doing stuff like that. However, fingers crossed for me personally in my save file and being able to depict these characters as accurately as possible, we would come back and add something like that. But I do know that the familiar that she has is definitely named after the familiar from the movie that she is shown having. And then the last little area that I wanted to do is this bit at the back of the boat, because the downstairs doesn't really have enough room for a proper cauldron and she cannot mix potions in the bathtub, even though she would want to. I wanted to make sure we had one upstairs for her that is functional and gives her proper space. And the rest of her house is super cluttered, so I just figured this area would be as well. And I wanted it to just be like a little brewing station for her with lots of bits and ingredients all sort of scattered around that she could throw in. And that is going to be the end of today's build. Let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below. We do have 2 more Willow Creek builds for Willow Creek, and then we're done. We're going to go over to Hemford on Bagley, so I hope you stay tuned for those. If you would like to support the Disney Save on Patreon, you can do so by clicking the link in my description box down below, or the one at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Hit that little bell icon below to turn on post notifications so you can get updated every single time I post, and I will talk to you all in the next one.